Hi, everyone. I am Micahel Rubino, your host of Mold Talks Docs. And today I have a very special, amazing guest. His name is Dr. Will Cole. Dr. Will Cole, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, my friend. I'm excited to nerd out with you.
Yeah. So for those who haven't maybe seen it, I was on Dr. Will's podcast, The Art of Being Well. And now I get to interview him. The tables are turning a little bit. So there is a really good one to check out because we talked more about the scientific principles around how do you improve a home. Today, we're going to talk about how that clinically is impacting people. So Dr. Will Cole, I want to thank you for being really one of the first doctors out there that started recognizing environmental exposures for your clients. And I have to say, when did you kind of start to realize and make that connection that the environment that we're exposed to is impacting our health?
Well, in the inception of my clinic, I mean, we've been doing telehealth for 12 years, and we were one of the first functional medicine telehealth centers in the world, actually, for the past 12 years. So this is basically all that I've thought about for the past decade plus, and it precedes even that because I've always been fascinated with health and wellness. But my people, like the people that I'm spending the most time with clinically, the cases that I'm immersed in, it are largely different types of autoimmune inflammation type cases. You really can't know those people and know their cases and look at their labs and understanding the components and understanding the research that's been done over the past decades, like past 2+ decades, and understanding toxins role in autoimmunity. And by toxins I mean environmental toxins, but also more specifically biotoxins, things like mold. So we have to understand that because these issues can trigger genetic predispositions for autoimmunity and cause a cascade of inflammation in people's body. So yeah, it's always been part of my way to get people better because there's no way to get them better but to deal with these problems.
No, and I greatly appreciate the awareness that you have on that and the awareness that you teach others to explore their home environments and make sure that something is not going on there that's making them sick. I'm sure you've heard the stories, right? And the same stories that I have, because we talk to the same type of people that are going through this. And I can't tell you how many doctors they go through with all these slew of symptoms that they're experiencing. And the doctors have no clue that it could be their environment that's suspending these symptoms. So I'm sure, do you see that same thing on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people, I'm not patients' first rodeo when it comes to doctors. Like they've been through a whole litany of different physicians, brilliant physicians, right? But missing key pictures,
Yeah.
missing key components to their health picture. And it's sad because largely the standard model of care is trained to diagnose a disease and match it with a medication. So and when you're looking at things like autoimmune problems or things like anxiety or depression or chronic fatigue syndrome, mainly like that's the big group of people that I'm seeing, like they are given the appropriate steroid, immunosuppressant, anti-anxiety medication, antidepressant, these type of problems. That's what they're given. They see the check engine light on, they give the appropriate check engine light cover upper and say, see you later. But the reality is these in functional medicine, they're seen as just like the check engine light, but you don't want to just cover up the check engine light and say, see you in 6 months. You want to realize what's underneath that proverbial hood, what's underneath that hood that's dysfunctional, that's misfiring, that's something's going on there to have that indicator light on in the first place. So yeah, it's frustrating, but to really hold space for these people that have gone through hell is a sacred responsibility for me. And if I can't change what they went through, but how they can change their present and their future.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that. And out of the thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but out of all the people that you encounter that you are helping on a daily basis, if you had to put a percentage to it, what percentage would you say of those are really dealing with environmental exposures?
Well, look, I think that with my patient base, I'm dealing with most of them have different HLA gene variants, which is the human leukocyte antigen, which is the way your body regulates inflammation and also handles biotoxins. Most of my patients have HLA gene variants that predispose them to being more sensitive and their immune systems to be more reactive to biotoxins. And they also have other methylation gene variants like the MTHFR gene variants and other methylation gene variants. And then the third group of gene variants that many of them have are different endocannabinoid gene variants, or the ECS, which regulates inflammation in the brain and mood and all that stuff. So it makes them more prone to food sensitivities. It makes them more prone to gut problems and autoimmune problems and sensitivity to biotoxins and their inability to methylate and clear this stuff out. So to answer your question more pointedly, a lot of them, because they have the infrastructural genetic one. It's estimated that a third of this puzzle for most people, a third of it is genetics. And then it's estimated generally that 2/3 is epigenetics. So the 1/3 for most of my patients is there. And the analogy that I use there is like a mug size. Like if somebody has, like I have this mug that I have tea in, like some people have massive mugs, some people have smaller mugs. That's your own unique bio-individuality. That's the heart of functional medicine. We're all different. So the bigger mug people, that's their genetic tolerance to handle stressors like environmental toxins, like biotoxins and chemicals and pesticides and glyphosate and heavy metals and gut problems and foods and things like this and stress and trauma. It's going to take a lot to overflow that massive mug. A lot of my patients tend to have smaller mugs. So they're going to overflow and hit their tipping point a lot easier. And then they look at their friends and family and like, what the heck? I eat cleaner. I do all the things that I'm supposed to do. And like, I can't get away with it. I have no wiggle room. I have no leeway into what I can get away with in my life. And that's that inability to handle stressors. So it's a large percentage of my patients have some sort of environmental toxin / biotoxin problem in their body because their body's not methylating and detoxing, clearing this stuff out.
What's so nice about modern medicine, obviously, is the fact that we can actually test for these things, can we not?
Oh yeah. That's where we have to get a good comprehensive health history, which is the first step, because you want to look at what labs are the most helpful, right? You don't want to just run labs just for the sake of it. I want to be comprehensive without being excessive with data. And then I'll get multiple labs perspective from their vantage point. Why does this person feel the way that they do? Why are they struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome or this autoimmune problem or hair loss or anxiety or brain fog, whatever? And we can quantify that. We can quantify that in lab. So we look at the genetic side of things. We understand that person's mug size, if you will. But then we want to look at the bigger slice of that pie, the 2/3, which is epigenetics. Those are the things that we're all exposed to. It's just what's the interplay and the communication between our genetics and the world around us and our epigenetics. So yeah, we can quantify that with blood labs and microbiome stool tests and hormonal tests and chemical sensitivity testing and mycotoxin testing. Yeah, we could get as granular as we want to really get what are the stones, so to speak, that are most likely to have something underneath it. And then what is underneath it is the next thing.
And all of that is so helpful for someone like me who's looking for correlations inside the home, right? So for example, they have high ochratoxin A. We're going to be looking for high levels of Aspergillus penicillium inside their home that could be producing that ochratoxin A. And 9 times out of 10, it's blaringly obvious when we run the labs inside the home too. Kind of like the 23andMe of their home, right? These dust samples are able to pick up what's in their environment that they're exposed to. And it's been remarkable. And we've been seeing remarkable, solutions for people to get rid of the exposure so they can finally be in a place of healing. So it's been quite a ride. And I love the fact that we can do it all utilizing science and medicine. And the difference is people like you and myself have really understood how to utilize the science and medicine to get people into a better state. And I think that's, we're kind of pioneers in that endeavor. And, hopefully we're helping pave the way for others because 7.5 billion people, there's a lot of work to do. Do you think that medicine is very individualized? And by that question, I'm really more talking about, in medicine, we tend to have all these different baskets with labels on them, and we put people in these baskets. And if you're in this basket, you do this treatment protocol. And if you're in this basket, you do that treatment protocol. And I wonder how effective that is from your viewpoint. And if you think it's really more understanding what the individual is going through and tailoring a plan for that individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think baskets can be pointers, but the baskets should not be your room. They should not be your life. And you cannot understand the complexity of human physiology by being labeled with an ICD-10 code or being put in this box and like, this is your path. So one of the main differences between functional medicine and conventional medicine, first thing, we interpret labs using a thinner reference range. So anybody that's listening to this or watching this, they'll know, hey, when I get my labs, I'm being compared to this reference range. That reference range on that conventional lab is largely based off of a statistical bell curve average of people who go to labs. People that go to labs are not the healthiest bunch of people. So a lot of people know intuitively something's not right here. Like this fatigue, these autoimmune problems, these inflammation symptoms are not right. The anxiety isn't right. The depression's not right. And the labs come back, quote unquote, normal. But what the doctor's unintentionally telling them is they're a lot like the other people with health problems that they're being compared to. And just because something's common doesn't necessarily mean it's normal or you should settle for it. And just because it's your everyday doesn't mean you should settle for it. So we want to look at optimal, not average. So we have what's known as the functional range in functional medicine. Where does vibrant wellness, where does optimal health reside, which is where we get our name, functional medicine. So we're looking at that spectrum of issues, right? That's so bio-individual to understand the nuances in the spectrum between health and health problems. So we're interpreting labs data differently to understand the spectrum of variables to consider. And then number two, we're looking at more comprehensive labs as a whole, like I just mentioned. And then third, we're all different. So we really want to take into account those objective data variables. And I almost think of them as like colors, strokes in a painting, where they're all going to have different painting lights and different colors and different aspects to them, because it's a confluence of factors that make that check engine light on for that person. So it's easy to say, well, that's anxiety, so everybody gets that same pill, whether it's a natural thing or a pharmaceutical. It's kind of irrelevant. But I want to say, what is upstream? What is the root driver of why you have the problem in the first place, right? And I think natural, quote unquote, things tend to get to the root cause a bit more because, for example, like if they have different micronutrients that are deficient in people that have these symptoms, yes, you're replacing what's deficient. And ultimately, nobody is sick from a medication deficiency. So we want to actually figure out what's the core problem. But the reality is, I want to see what's underneath the hood and get upstream. And that's going to be different for different people. So it does us no good to be reductive and say, well, this is that person's box and this is exactly what they're going to do. A lot of people fall through the cracks of that model of care. And I'm not dogging and saying conventional medicine is not good. We have amazing advancements in science and medicine, and people are alive because of medication and need to be on medication. There's nothing wrong with that. I just would say, what is your most effective option that causes you the least amount of side effects? And if medications fit that criteria, and many people it does, then yes, that's going to be a tool within your toolbox. But even when it's a tool within the toolbox, it's still just a tool within the toolbox. It's not the only tool for most people. So instead of being tribal about this, which I think only hurts the person that's struggling, and that's what, well, honestly, both sides do. It's this amongst many other things. It's political tribalism going on, but there's also medicine tribalism where it's like, the quacks, the mainstream medicine calling everybody that's not a quack, and then people in the conventional at the integrative side, the natural side, saying, well, they're killing people and they're drug dealers. And then it's like, what is that serving anybody? Instead of being so tribal, let's be both and instead of either or. And that's where I think functional medicine holds both. I mean, the Cleveland Clinic has a functional medicine center. We're not fringe, but even though, sometimes the media would like to paint it like that. But the reality is we're getting people healthy. We're basing it on labs. And who should be against that?
I love that. And, I think this ties back into this blaring statistic that I'm about to repeat. Over 40% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. And I don't know what the stats were years ago and tracing that back, but I mean, 40%, that's a lot of people that are not living an optimal life, that is somehow suffered some sort of loss of quality of life. And I think that we have to do everything we can to advance science and medicine continuously to lessen that point. I know that I can help on the air quality side, and I certainly know that you can help on the medicine side, but we're just one people, right? And so a lot more is needed. And I think it starts with educating people, into doing their due diligence before they just jump down rabbit holes, because that's how a lot of mistakes get made. As you said, people fall through the cracks, you know, and why people fall through the cracks is simply from my perspective, just because, you know, people get put in boxes and start treatment protocols that end up not working because there's other complexities that the box isn't accounting for. And there we go, right? Now they're gone. So, you know, ending suffering on a global platform like this is gonna require some legwork. So I appreciate everything that you do in that. And, you know, I'll open up the floor to you to comment on any of that if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that that's very well said. And it just, as I mentioned earlier, like ubiquity doesn't necessarily equate with normalcy. And many people think, well, this is my lot in life. I'm just getting older. I'm just stressed out. And like, that's like one of the most telling things that I see for people is typically they already have gone through this route of a realization by the time I have a consult with them online. But I'll say we have different quizzes on on drwillcole.com, and the quizzes are also in our books, and people love quizzes. And I just adapted these quizzes from questions that I ask patients. And it's that aha moment that I see when people fill out the quizzes, which is just kind of learning and about yourself and learning about your health and feel. I can't tell you how many people tell me, man, I just thought that was completely normal. Like I'd go through this every day and wow, like I don't have to be going through this anymore. There's so many examples of that where people just settle for it and live various degrees of this sort of bleak, fatigued, wired, and tired existence. But it's just not like, it's not your lot in life. And there's so much agency that people have over their health, but they have to give their body the chance to get to homeostasis.
We almost like gaslight ourselves, right? We start saying
Yeah.
like, oh, it's just because I'm getting older. Oh, it's because I have kids. The kids are tiring me
Yeah.
out. You know, we start making all these things. But when you actually reflect back on it just a couple of years ago, really not a whole lot has changed in a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
The reason your health is declining is because something is causing it to decline, not just because you're getting older. I mean, I have seen 103-year-olds, you know, more active than some people out there that are half their age, right? And so I
Yeah.
think it's really important to remember that there's a reason for all of this, and you don't have to suffer unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just how life happens.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important that you highlight that.
Yeah. Well, I think I've never heard someone say that, but that's exactly what it is. It's like a self gaslighting
Yeah.
that's happening right now. And culture really feeds into that, because it's like culture is really bent towards just covering up symptoms and distraction, right? It's like they want to numb us with like social media and buying things and consumerism, and people aren't even taking the time to be introspective to say, where's my health going? And then they look up from their busy hectic lives and they realize, wow, my health is actually really eroding here. And hopefully their wake up call is earlier rather than later.
Yeah, well said. You know, we talk a lot about mold. Obviously, I wrote a book called The Mold Medic. You know, mold is a big buzzword. We obviously know that it's more than just mold when we're looking at a home. There's toxins, there's bacteria. COVID-19 obviously highlighted another big part of microbiology, and viruses. So it's just about looking at your environment with a full lens, seeing what's there and fixing it. And I think that we've had a lot more success over the years, kind of expanding upon that and looking through a wider lens here. And I just wanted to kind of bring up your question. What is it about mold, you know, specifically? Is it that mold causes inflammation? Is it that mold produces mycotoxins? What do you think is some of the bigger problems with mold specifically?
And the way that I think of it is kind of what you said, is it's oftentimes the people that have genetic variants that make them more sensitive to mold. Well, look, I mean, you have taught me so much over there's lots of different types of mold. Not all mold is toxic. So we have to understand what type of mold are we talking about, and how much is that person exposed to? And then third variable, what's their genetic variances and epigenetic, other things going on in their life that's making them more susceptible. Meaning if somebody has different methylation gene variants and HLA gene variants, plus they have underlying gut problems and they already have like nutrient deficiencies that's making their immune system more prone and more weak, and they have past trauma and stress that's keeping their immune system and their nervous system in that sympathetic fight or flight stress state, that's a perfect storm. Then you have a genetic component, you have some epigenetic health problems that are going through, plus exposure of a specific type of mold that releases a specific type of mycotoxin. That's the perfect storm. So it's easy to say, well, make blanket statements about that and just say mold and not explain the context, or just say, understand that there's a bigger combination of factors that need to be at play here. And that's what we look at, is that these different combination of factors that can produce a result like autoimmune problems, chronic fatigue syndrome, et cetera. So, and also I would say too, it's not just about the mycotoxins. As you pointed, it's what I call like a mycotoxin confluence. There is a bacterial component to this as well. And because of the bacterial component plus the mycotoxin component, a lot of latent, dormant viral infections get reactivated as well that are opportunistic, like Epstein-Barr virus, et cetera. So it is not just one thing. It is definitely a combination of things. And but the commonality between all of these things is that they're largely biotoxins and maybe some other environmental toxins at play for some people that we can quantify on labs as well. That's further perpetuating this inflammatory storm. But the other commonality is the concept of the bioterrain. It's this like, what is their own unique landscape that we can help their body achieve homeostasis again. So part of that is, in the case of mold, removing the source, of course. But then number two, it's clearing the stuff out to decrease the tipping point. Like that mug is overflowing right now. Like they're at their tipping point. They have nothing, their body says something's got to give, and it's in the form of chronic inflammation. So we have to do a lot to clear that stuff out through protocols to clear what's stressing out and causing that mug to overflow over time. But that's really what it is. And then over time, we can get their gut healthier and their immune system supported enough, and something called T regulatory cells, which are just like the immune balancing cells. We can create enough resilience, I guess is what I'm trying to say, where their body can handle some stress again. That mug is significantly emptied, so they have some wiggle room. They have some resilience to handle things. So those are the things that I think about, and the clinical objectives that I have to achieve over the months and months that I'm with people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. These are rare occurrences, but I'm going to ask you about them anyway. There's rare instances where things like Aspergillosis develop, and Aspergillosis is where Aspergillus, the species of mold, is actually growing inside your lungs. We've also heard reports through various, cases of mold growing in people's nasal cavities and their sinus cavities. And then where they're actually producing the toxins within those spaces, obviously severely impacting people. Have you seen any extreme cases like that?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And again, I think it's largely due to I'm not seeing the general population. I'm seeing a bigger, look, these are not small gene variants. If you look at different MTHFR gene variants and HLA gene variants, they're not rare by any means.
Right.
But I'm saying they're not everybody. And then not everybody with that set of gene variants are exposed to all of these things all at once and hit that perfect storm all at once. So yeah, Aspergillosis, I've seen people cough up black mucus out of their lungs from these molds. I have seen people that their biofilm, basically the mucosal barrier of their sinuses and throughout their body, is pathogenic. It's very unhealthy. And they have this chronic inflammatory sinus infection that they can never heal from. And I really believe when you look at the labs and we implement protocols in their lives, it's really the health of that person's microbiome and biofilm that we're able to get them healthier and clearing out that bacterial mold toxin combination that's at play there. So yeah, it's without a doubt things that I've seen, but I'm not seeing the run-of-the-mill things.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about genetic predispositions, epigenetics, et cetera. I always argue all the time that we don't really know how environmental exposures like mold, bacteria, toxins, et cetera, impact what we would consider otherwise healthy individuals. And I always share my own story about how I've been exposed really over 10 years, even with the best protection, it's only 99%. I'm going into people's homes. I'm, again, exposed at some level. And I had, some health declines, I would say late last year into this year, where I just was like gaining weight no matter, I mean, I would eat apples and chicken and broccoli, and that's it, no carbs, nothing, and still was gaining weight. Really struggled to do that. My energy levels were depleting. It wasn't until I, really was just like, I need to detox and started sweating. What was interesting in that detox, and this, I tell this part of the story only because I think people struggle with similar symptoms here. I wasn't sweating in a 140-degree sauna for half hour. I mean, it was like just a little bit. 7 days later of just keep going at it and keep going at it, I started profusely sweating. So obviously there was some sort of blockage happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I found that very interesting because I don't have any genetic predispositions or, I've never really had any issues my entire life outside of maybe asthma as a kid, which probably was due to being in a not great environment. But I think it's very interesting to kind of look at that because I hear people all the time where they, wife was sick or kids were sick or husband sick. And the other people who don't claim to be sick, all of a sudden, after they're improving their environment and they're going through similar protocols and similar diets, they're all of a sudden now realizing after the fact that, I have more energy or, I'm sharper. My mental clarity is increased.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to see that. And obviously, I think that all needs to be studied and looked at a little further. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, it's a phenomenon that I see quite a bit. I hear about it almost weekly from newer patients that we implement sweating protocols into their life, whether it be an infrared sauna or a hot bath or exercise or whatever they have access to, right? That they have trouble sweating. And it's without a doubt part of that phenomenon of the immune system and the detoxification impairments that are at play there, and the body's temperature not able to fully clear this stuff out. So yeah, I like you mentioned, I think the actual mechanisms within, and I'm probably a cascade of different things at play there that come to mind of the potential components to this, but without a doubt, I think it should be explored more because it's something that I see all the time where it's solvable. I mean, we're able to push through it. Like you mentioned, being consistent, starting off low and slow within reason to we don't want someone in there 2 hours before they're sweating. You have to be reasonable with these things, but it's like, being consistent, starting off low and slow to start provoking that hormetic effect, that good stress, their body can start clearing this stuff out. In part, that's one of the ways that we can do that.
What about the other side of things where people, you have a family of four and two of the four are sick, the other two, aren't complaining that they're sick or aren't complaining of specific symptoms. But as everybody starts to get better, the other two who were otherwise healthy started to talk about how, ever since we did this, I'm feeling better too. I didn't realize that I wasn't quite 100% because, with health, it's usually such a slow decline that you don't really realize until you look at now versus a span of a year or two, right? So, have you seen, the impact that this can make on people who really aren't quote unquote sick?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's so relative too, right? It's first of all, it's that combination of different genetic and epigenetic variables. Like that's everybody's baseline is different then. And then it's like, well, what room, if it is, we're talking about mold toxins and bacterial toxins, if it's in the home, what room are they in? What are they exposed to more? That's something to think about too. But even if all things were created equally, but because they're really not, I mean, there's so many variables to consider. That relative, like back as I mentioned earlier, it's like, well, some people are just so used to settling for that with that low grade fatigue or that brain fog or that anxiety, background anxiety, that they don't even realize it's a thing until the stuff's gone. And they're like, dang, I thought I was a 10 out of 10 with my health, but I was actually quite a bit lower. And it's not until they level up their health that they realize that they were just pushing through the day just to get through the day. And oftentimes those people are generally more, let's just say them emotionally resilient people, or they are just hyper, like type A, super motivated, super perseverant people. And they're used to pushing through so much that anybody quote unquote, with like not that resilience, they didn't have it, they would notice it a lot more. But these people are just used to go, 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 go. And they don't realize it until it's not there anymore, that it really was keeping them back.
Yeah, no, it's a good valid point, and I'm certainly excited for the future as we start to uncover more and more about environmental exposures and just how important of a piece of the puzzle it is. Obviously, you and I know it's a very important piece because we see it every day. But as more and more awareness comes out and more demand for studies comes out, I think we're going to be shocked at just how big of an important piece that it really is, and how many conditions it either causes, exacerbates, etc., that just makes people not feel their best, and is part of the overall problem. So excited to uncover that. Now, let's just say we have a client who is going through some environmental exposures. You're seeing them, and obviously your goal is to try to help get them better. How important is them checking out their environment and making sure that they're improving their environment to the healing process itself?
Well, it's paramount. I mean, we have to look at that. So we have a very comprehensive application, health questionnaire, and consultation process for patients. So we get quite granular when it comes to their living space, their workspace, their car, the things they're exposed to, where do they live, like what are they nearby from an environmental side of things, as far as golf courses, and even their type of job, if they're exposed to different types of chemicals with their job, like hairdressers or different chemical plants. Like, we really go back to their throughout their life. And for some people, we even go back to like generationally, what's at play there. So that's an interesting component too. We see actually quite a bit of patients that is Chernobyl, in the Ukraine in like the 80s.
Yeah.
We see quite a bit of Ukrainian people that were exposed, their parents were exposed to things, and it's impacting them. So, and that's obviously an extreme example, but a lot of less extreme examples of things that they were exposed to in their past, or their parents were exposed to in their past, that's impacting them, their health today. So it should be everybody. It should be everybody. It should just be, if you're going through a chronic health problem, this stuff needs to be looked at and talked about. And that's the problem of why so many people are falling through the cracks, because it's just like, all right, you have this symptom, take this medication. They're not even asking questions. And how are you going to know what you're up against if you're not looking at the problem? How are you going to know what you're up against and deal with it if they're not even looking there? It's like if I lost my car keys out in the parking lot, but I spent all day looking inside my clinic. Well, it's like, I'm not looking in the right place. I'm like not even going in the right direction. I'm preoccupied with something that ultimately is not where the keys are at. So the keys we have to go where the keys at. And that's through listening to someone and holding space for them and asking questions and being curious and really going clinically, what are the stones that are most likely to have the key underneath it? And that's where we have to go.
No, that's really well said, and I really appreciate your answer and all the stuff that you're doing for people to try to figure out what that key is, because it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Now, when people do find environmental exposures, I mean, I would imagine that you're looking at that, you're looking at the correlation, you're saying absolutely this is impacting you. Are you recommending that they seek out someone like me or similar to fix those issues as part of the program?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we just refer everybody to Micahel Rubino. That's what we do. So, I mean, so many of my patients have worked with your team and you.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. So like you mentioned earlier, like sick homes, like that's the term that's used in this space, right? Sick homes. And I almost titled your podcast episode of The Art of Being Well, Sick Homes, Sick Bodies, but I shortened it a little bit to Sick Homes, Inflamed Bodies, and Foggy Brains, something like that.
Yeah.
Because what the home that they're living in is impacting their health. And it's obviously, we know it's not just the homes, but it's their workplace potentially, it's the car potentially, it's wherever they're like doing life. Lots of times these things for many people have to be ruled out. And maybe it's nothing for them. Maybe it's nothing. But you don't know if you don't rule it out. And it's always going to be a variable. And I see many people that they say, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but it's like, yeah, my home is new. Like, that's not a thing. My home is new. My car is brand new. And it's like, how many times do people say that? And it doesn't matter how new your house is, no matter how beautiful and how like unmoldy you think your house looks like, it doesn't smell like mold. And the things we find, like countless stories.
It's so true. And I think, I'm going to ask you this question because I think this is a valuable feedback for people. But we've had the pleasure of working with people together and seeing the transformation. And isn't it kind of amazing when you look at their labs and you're seeing that they're significantly improving when the home is fixed and your treatment program obviously is being followed properly?
Oh yeah, it's so cool. Yep, it's like you have to clean up the house, clean up wherever it's at. And if it's at work, like we work, we'll write letters and advocate for our patients if it's at work. Or we have a big percentage of patients that are school teachers, and not to make a big broad sweeping statement about schools, but a lot of older buildings as a whole, which many schools can be, and courthouses and libraries and things like that, that are maybe more public buildings that are not getting the TLC that they need. And they just cover it up with paint and they think that's enough. Like I can't tell you how many stories where it's like, yeah, like let's go to these places. Let's figure out what's going on here to clear this up. And it's so amazing to see how resilient the human body is when you give it the chance to breathe.
Yeah, no, it's so true. A lack of education and a lack of funding create a recipe for disaster. And I think
Yeah.
all these things will change as we become more and more aware of everything, and we demand the change, of course, as a civilization. So for all those listening, don't lose hope. We're with you. We're fighting the good fight. We see the data. We have the data, and we will be, making the changes that we can make. And when we talk about these treatment protocols here, obviously they're fixing the home. That's a great thing. But at the end of the day, of course, there's also, what's already in the body is in the body. And now we have to get that out. And so stopping the exposure and shutting off the faucet is a big component. But now they have to get rid of these things from the body. And so, what treatment protocols are you finding most effective? And, give people an overview of what it looks like to work with Dr. Cole and his team.
Well, as I mentioned, it starts with a health history, and then that informs what labs are the most relevant. And then we build a protocol based off of those labs. And sometimes we'll start subdiagnostically, meaning like, okay, the labs we have to wait 4 to 8 weeks to get the labs back. So we'll base it off of any prior labs they have, or based off of their health history and their consultation, just to help them in the meantime, other than, versus waiting for 8 weeks to get labs back. But, regardless, there's different avenues for us to be there for somebody. And we start with food. I mean, food is primary, right? You cannot supplement your way out of a poor diet. So you have to be supportive of that biotrain and their body ability to detox and methylate and lowered inflammation levels, and bring in things that are raw materials to support natural detoxification pathways. Like many people have impaired detox pathways, not just from genetics, it's epigenetically. They're just eating a nutrient deficient diet, and their body doesn't have the raw material cofactors to build the proper enzymes and pathways to clear this junk out. So food is primary, and focusing on nutrient density is primary, and going off of a lot of inflammatory foods is primary. And then bringing in protocols that are case specific and condition specific to the things that are at play there. So they typically, when you're talking about toxins and biotoxins, typically it involves biofilm disruptors. There's things like serrapeptase and N-acetylcysteine, and stevia as another biofilm, or stevia as a biofilm disruptor. Different detox support, so liver detoxification support, systemic detoxification support, sweating is a part of that, but different herbs and botanicals can also be supporting detox. Antifungals, antimicrobials with the bacterial fungal combination is definitely extremely important. Things like cat's claw, pau d'arco, olive leaf extract, many others that can be brought in as well. And then binders, so activated charcoal, zeolite, bentonite clay, and then, cholestyramine and medications are needed sometimes too. So that's typically the confluence of the core stuff, and then filling in nutrient deficiencies. So vitamin D is one that helps to regulate detoxification and methylation and inflammation level regulation. And magnesium is another deficiency that we see a lot. Selenium, iodine is deficient in some people, and you have to be judicious with the iodine. But iron deficiency is another one that can really slow down healing. So we have to work on iron deficiency anemia patterns if we have that, and then really work on gut health. I mean, gut is 75% of the immune system. So when you're dealing with immune mediated issues like this, supporting the gut is paramount of different herbs, botanicals, and foods to be very, very restorative and nourishing to the gut. And our gut is our second brain. So 95% of serotonin is made in the gut and stored in the gut. So really working on the gut brain axis and the vagus nerve, because a lot of these people have vagus nerve problems, and it's keeping their nervous system in that wired and tired sympathetic autonomic hyperdrive response. So really working on the physiological, but also the psychological side of it. And we work in combination with, like, we'll integrate mindfulness meditation and different mindfulness practices and different trauma work and things like EMDR and trauma therapy, et cetera. That's anything to get that vagal tone and that nervous system to be more into that parasympathetic, resting, digesting, hormone balance state. So it's a lot. It seems like what I just threw out to you, it's like a lot of stuff, but those are the pieces of the puzzle for many people. It's not that they necessarily have to do all those things, but for many people, it's going to be a combination of some of those categories at least.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot. It's definitely overwhelming, but that's why it's so important to hire a reputable doctor like yourself that already knows all of this stuff, right? I mean, to be able, and one of the reasons why experts are so important in their field is because they know the variables, right? Not everything is cut and dry. Everything really in life is individualized. So it's important to be able to hire people that have been in these situations, that know what specific outcomes will happen based upon certain things, and can help really look at the data and put together a plan. So I appreciate that. You mentioned one thing before. I know we're running out of time. So before we go into your socials and your website and all that kind of stuff, I have a personal question to ask. And this is based on the food is medicine thing that you were talking about earlier, basically. How many people do you see that think they're eating healthy? After you ask them a few questions, you realize that they're not eating healthy. And I have a hunch it's going to be a lot. And excuse me, but it's very confusing what healthy really means in terms of food, because we have all these marketing terms out there that confuse the crap out of us. So we'd love for you to comment on that.
Yeah, it's definitely relative, right? It's depending on who you ask. And Dr. Google is a fickle physician. Sometimes you can substantiate anything we want to. It's like confirmation bias and echo chambers galore for people. But the reality is I don't have a horse in the race on like, this is the magic way to everybody should eat. I just want to look at nutrient density and bioindividuality. That's basically it. Like and preference. Third would be the preference. And that's part of bioindividuality. But I mean, bioindividuality as far as like, what's their labs, what is their makeup, what's that look like, bring in as much nutrient dense foods that are in agreement with that bioindividuality, like what can their body tolerate, and then what's their preference, because if they hate what they do, that stress and like negative emotion around the food is going to create a completely different response versus if the person loves what they do. So that's sort of the science and art of what I do in functional medicine, is to like, what's realistic, what's going to move the needle, and what do they freaking love. And even if they don't freaking love it, what do they like? What do they at least like? That's it. That's in alignment with our goals, and which is their goals. So much of it is like a mind paradigm shift to say like, okay, this isn't about what you can't have, and like, those are bad foods, and like, these are the good foods, and like shaming somebody. That's the antithesis of sustainable wellness. But it's like, okay, how can I love my body enough to feed it good things that work for my body? How can I, use food as a way of use food as a form of self-respect, really? So that's kind of the heart of what I do. So to answer your question more pointedly, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and you can hear things on a podcast or on social media or read a book, and you think, well, that's my thing, and like, that's the right path. But I've written books before, but I can't put all of bioindividuality for you in a book. So clinical care is you're making it your book. It's using real life as a lab to determine your book. And we're able to find that out through clinically monitoring and labs and coaching and guiding and really fine tuning things as we're seeing how health unfolds in your life.
I love that. And for me, I know I really resonate with that so well, because if I am super strict even if it's for like 2 weeks straight, maybe I'm seeing the results I want to see or what have you. At the end of that 2-week period, at some point I'm gonna be like, well, now I need to reward myself with something completely opposite with what I've just had for 2 weeks. So, it's really about that balance and making sure you have that balance for that steady kind of result. I wanted to highlight some of your books now and take the opportunity to talk about your social media, your website, and everything in between, because I want people to be able to find you very easily. You've helped a lot of people. We've worked together, helped a lot of people. So this has been, really tremendous. And I want people to have those resources. So tell me first about your books and where people can find them, because I know you've written a few and they're all amazing.
Thanks. Yeah. So Ketotarian is my first book, and The Inflammation Spectrum is my second book, and Intuitive Fasting is my third book. And the podcast, it's called The Art of Being Well. There's a new episode every Thursday. You've been on it, so they can check that out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And drwillcole.com is where honestly most of that stuff lives. So you can get links to the book, the podcast, and the consultation information if they're interested in telehealth and in what we do clinically with patients.
That's amazing. And for those that don't know, he's also got an amazing Instagram at Dr. Will Cole.
Yeah, sorry about that. At Dr. Will Cole. Yeah, social media, all the things. Trying TikTok out, but
Me too. I'm not so big on TikTok yet, but all the cool kids are doing it. So I'm on it, try to get that awareness out there. Well, education. Dr. Will Cole, this has been, such a pleasure. Thanks for having you coming on here. You're a wealth of information, and I really hope that people learned a lot here today.
Thanks, man.